The cracks are appearing in the lengths of his limbs, the wounds packed with crisp packets and odds ends of fruit. The drunkard's piss against his fingers. His hair, once flowing and bright, sits flush to his skin in a tangle. His eyes are clouded. The Colossus of Luton sits high on the concrete, legs sweeping over the centre of the town, feet planted into the layers and layers pounded by working boots, high-heeled shoes, and pristine financed trainers. His mouth is dry and cracked in the corners. He hasn't spoken out loud in years. He's seen the trains run more and more and more, leaving the town for the city, more and more and more and more left behind on the streets, sheltering under his watch. The town changes, and he attempts to stay the same, watchful over the old souls who remember him shiny and new, who kept his old name alive, open to the jeers and scorn of the younger ones. The Colossus of Luton sprawls high over the brickwork of the older factories, the history that's more palatable, of making adornments for the prosperous, of soft craft and stitches. He sits in witness to the parts they don't want to remember, the blind eyes from the dyes, the cracked hands from the blockers, the mechanics, the lost limbs, the pain, the pain, the pain. He sees that pain carried through the generations, the sons of fathers whose tender hearts were steeled, the daughters and the wives and the wives and the wives. He can feel the tension in the town. There's not enough for any of them, and there's too much that needs fixing that's rooted into him, pulsing through his heart, weighing him down to the very foundations of the place. He'll never leave this vigil, no matter how much he wants to. Some days he loves this town so much it feels as if his chest will crack open. Some days he rages against his incapacity, watching people cry in the streets with the weight of the town bearing down on them. Most days, he sits silent and unmoving, ancient, silent, and still. There are many people who walk through his fingers, dance through his limbs, stay for a few years and move on by train or plane or Vauxhall motor. He sees them come in with bright eyes and leave with sagging shoulders, come in their droves to sit in fluorescent lit classrooms or sleep in sheds like sardines, then migrate away like birds in winter. There are the other faces that stay on their toes like prize fighters, looking him in the eye and calling him a bollock. There is one girl, he has noticed, walks through him and touches the edge of the cracks. He expected she would leave within the first whispers, one that flits in through the cracks at the edges and flies out into the world. Yet he sees her face more and more in different parts of the town, eyes locked with strangers, hands outstretched and heart open. She goes to the mosque every week. She prays and she looks and she prays and she sees, and there are many like her that he has watched over in the years. What sets her apart is that one day, one unexpected day, she looks straight at him. His eyes are misty and covered in bird excrement, but he can feel her gaze on his, unmoving. He can feel for the first time the prick of something like shame as her eyes scan over him, seeing layers of paint upon paint upon paint, cracks hastily filled with sod knows what, beer stains and piss stains and vomit stains and more. He can feel the heat of her gaze, and he expects judgment, for her to leave in disgust. But her eyes are locked on him, and with her heart open, she holds out her hand. The Colossus of Luton is touched many times in the day, but never with care. Often a fist, sometimes knocked into, held open. She lays a hand on his and says, "I want to go on a journey, and I need you to come with me." He feels something stir slightly, but pushes it away. Words like that have been said in passing before. Words like that have been said many times to no end, promising everything, but chased away by grizzled sky and a pretty horizon. She would take her hand, and her sights, and her ideas, and her life, and her words, and go by train or plane or by... But suddenly he feels the press of a boot against him as her grip becomes tightened. With a deep inhale of breath, she begins to climb him, slowly at first, stumbling over the slick of the anti-grip paint on the lowest parts. She almost falls to the floor, but she grips so hard that her knuckles turn white and her nails turn red. More and more she climbs further and further, and people stop to watch her, seeing him for the first time in eons, whispering, then shouting to each other in 300 different tongues, mouth agog as she scales him way above his shoulder and sits, waiting, watching, surveying the town from the height that he has sunk to, the sunset on the horizon, the damp on her hands. It is quiet for a moment. "It's so much," she whispers in his ear, and he could feel the corners of his mouth crumble. She sounds frightened for a moment, just a moment. The Colossus is suddenly aware of how small she is, how fragile, how young and naive and full of hope and fear. And for that moment, he worries that she is too afraid. Then she looks to the sky. "So," she says to him, around him, to anyone who will listen, "are you coming with me or not?" And he feels his legs move for the first time in most of his life. He feels his body crack in the concrete. He feels the blaze of soft grey sun on his flesh. He feels the blood move again, the tree roots and the tarmac and the grit slowly drape his body and adorn him. He feels the rubble on his skin turn to powder as he stands, once again, the girl on his shoulder, the sunset on his brow. He stands for the first time in as long as he has memory, shaking, imperfect, but strong.